No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And for those of you joining us for the first time this month, what we're doing is discussing the 5 most viewed leadership videos on YouTube and kind of reviewing them and discussing whether or not they're worth watching. And for the first Monday in December, we talked about Simon Lancaster's Speak Like a Leader video, which was the 5th most viewed leadership video on YouTube. Last week, we talked about Oprah Winfrey's interview with Stanford Business School on career life and leadership. And on this week's episode, we're going to talk about the 3rd most viewed leadership video on YouTube. And that is Laura Sicola's video called Want to Sound Like a Leader? Start by saying your name right. And this is interesting. This is an interesting video because it starts out very similarly to Simon Lancaster's Speak Like a Leader in that it's all about making sure you're kind of acting the part, making sure you sound like someone who is a leader as opposed to just acting like a leader. And again, just like Simon Lancaster's video, it kind of started me out on the negative, like, well, I'm always big on how do we act like leaders more than how we sound like leaders, and I had to kind of grow into this video just like I had to on the first one. What did you kind of think about this?
Yeah, same thing. It's like I'm listening to begin with and figure out like where are we going with this, and then there was a cool little thing where she talked about how do you say your name appropriately. And my name is Lorenzo Flores. See that? I've been practicing.
That little gap between the first and last name is a little on the long side. I might tighten it up just a little bit,
Just a little bit, right? I'm still practicing. Yeah. Not there yet.
Yeah.
But similar was like, okay, it's just the way of like talking and trying to get people's attention. But then as she went on, it made a lot more sense to me, especially when you start to think about the wrong way to use your voice and the lack of matching your message with your voice. Like that's when it really connected for me, because I started to now think about all the times that I know people and leaders that have the same presentation, no matter what the audience is, and no matter if it's super urgent or it's like just a casual conversation. And I said, aha, now this makes a lot more sense. So that's what I really enjoyed about the video, and I know we'll kind of get into it. But similarly, it took me a minute to warm up into it, and then I realized, okay, this is actually really, really good advice.
Yeah, she talks about the concept of executive presence and how there are 3 components of executive presence: appearance, communication skills, and gravitas, which is kind of like the teeth that your words have. Like, do the things you say actually mean what they say? Do they convey the message you're trying to convey? And then she goes specifically into something that she thinks is a missing piece in that list, which is called vocal executive presence. And she says that kind of slides in between communication skills and gravitas as your vocal executive presence. And I like this a lot because, again, like what you just said, we all know people who, no matter what they're talking about, they sound exactly the same way. Whether they're talking about recognition, or they're talking about things that have to improve, or talking about a sense of urgency around something, they have the exact same tone, their voice sounds the exact same way, and it becomes very difficult to read into what they're feeling about what they're saying. And ultimately, what I took from this is a leader who is sounding like a leader. What they're doing is they're making sure that the people they're talking to have evidence that the words they're saying are actually believed by them. So anybody can write anything down on paper, and then you can hand it to somebody, they can read it, and whether or not they believe you in that that's what you actually feel and think and are bought into will probably be based on what they know of you already, the history of your relationship with them. But when it comes to actually telling them something and giving them information, the majority of whether or not they believe that that's actually what you believe will come down to things like your tone and your vocal executive presence, how you sound when you're saying it, and the different words you're using to convey that message are kind of secondary to what the tone is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because that's what she talked about, was how much time do you spend preparing content if you're going to present something or have a meeting or whatever, versus how much time you spend like in tonality, like thinking about and processing through and really understanding, like, at what point of this content do I want to make sure that I, that I land this message, that I shift and change, how I sound, the words that I use, the ways that I will repeat certain phrases to make sure that my message lands. Like, a lot of times I don't see a lot of leaders do that. I see a lot of people spend a lot of time on slides and content, and here's what it wants to say, and here's what I want to say, but how they say it seems to be lacking. And I think that that's what ends up coming across is I can tell that you're just telling me these things because you need to, versus I can tell you're telling me these things because you want to and you believe them and you're asking for something. And I think that really is, a big shift as far as what I took away from this, in making sure that as a leader of leaders, I am allowing my leaders to spend time practicing what some of those things are. Like let me hear it. Let me hear what you're going to say. Let me hear, how you're going to land this point, versus let me read what your slide says. Let me read what you're going to say. Is just so much more important if I want to help them become more authentic and really connect with an audience.
I think that's so true. I have had these coaching sessions with people before where I ask them to role play with me and tell me what they're going to say, and they look at me like I'm crazy, and they say, well, and they start telling me what they're going to say, not from a standpoint of they're actually talking to me, but like, this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to say this. It's like, no, that's not what I asked you to do. Tell it to me like you're going to tell it to that person. And it's really awkward at first, but it's incredible, these light bulb moments that happen when people do this and they catch themselves saying what they supposedly were going to say to that person, and they stop halfway through a sentence and think, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. That's not what I want to say. It's like, aha, can you imagine if the very first time you said that outright was the person you actually had to deliver the message to? It is so important to practice these things and to make sure that the tone that you're using and the intonation and the highs and the lows and the peaks and the valleys in your speech and the cadence and the sense of urgency and all those different things, they matter so much more than the words. The words are important, but how you say them are infinitely more important. And you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't put much, much more time and preparation into how the words you put down are going to sound coming out as you put into actually figuring out what those words are. So I can relate that to my personal life, and not just in terms of the conversations that I've had with other people, but that's happened to me when leaders have asked me to change the way that I'm saying something, where they've said, we all, the old adage, everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten, right? Well, one of those moments from that book is, it's not about what you say, it's how you say it. And, our parents tell us that when we're growing up, and it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And that matters so much more as a leader, because it's not just about the message you're delivering. They have to believe that your buy-in to it matches the buy-in you're asking from them. It is not higher or lower. This isn't kind of a catch-all where you can just, I want to sound as passionate as I can about everything because then I'll catch everybody. No, you can be too much over the top too. It has to match perfectly. Any lower than it should be or higher than it should be, and you're going to lose people.
Yeah, and exactly to your point, one of the examples that she gave in regards to like having the messenger's voice match the message, where she talked about James Earl Jones and him as Darth Vader.
Yes.
And then Fran Drescher, right? From like The Nanny.
Yep.
Yeah. And saying like, well, what if Fran Drescher was Darth Vader?
Right.
And
what if
James
Darth Vader
Earl
was
Jones,
Elmo? She said, what if James
was
Earl
Elmo?
Jones was Elmo? Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, it doesn't match. It doesn't make sense. And I think that it's something that we don't talk a lot about is the fact that this is not necessarily like a radio show. Like, this is not like, welcome to Hacking Your Leadership Radio. You're listening to the smooth jams of Chris Stark and Lorenzo Flores here on WHYL.
Yes.
It's not a radio show, but at the same time, you have people that don't even they don't hear their own voice, or they do something that she talks about, which is upspeak, which constantly changes the end of a sentence to sound like I'm asking you a question or looking for validation when I'm talking, and people hear that and it just drowns them out, and they're no longer like, you're probably wanting to smack yourself in the face right now
Yes.
as I'm talking this way, right?
Yes.
Because like there's damage that's done if you don't know how to appropriately utilize your voice to land a message, and you don't realize that these types of speaking techniques can either push people away or completely make them disinterested in what you're trying to tell them.
Yeah, my favorite thing that she said is talking about how we want the messenger's voice to fit the message. And, you know, the example she gave about Darth Vader and Elmo and Fran Drescher makes sense, but it applies in leadership life too. If you as the leader, if your voice says, I'm not a leader, instead I'm a follower, or I'm not a leader, instead I'm a deliverer of a message, that's a very different thing to put across to the people who report to you and whose buy-in you need than to say that you're a leader, not just in terms of you can say you're a leader, but are the words you're saying confirming that to the person you're talking to that you are a leader? Or are they thinking in their head, this person is James Earl Jones trying to be Elmo? And if your people get that impression about you, then it's probable that the things you're saying are landing on deaf ears because they can't even get past the fact that you don't sound like the person you're trying to be.
Yeah, and I think two things that she said. The first thing was, around reading your audience and identifying the kind of person that they would be most open to receiving the message. So basically, like, know your audience. Think about what they do. Like, think about their responsibilities. Think about what's going to connect with them, what's important to them, what's relevant to them, and consider these things similar to like our culture acronym. Like, consider yourself. Like, consider what the audience needs and would be most open to listening to, and make the adjustments to be able to present to them in a way that they can connect with. But at the same time, what she says is, don't change who you are. This is not about being fake. This is not about, putting on a mask. This is not about changing who you are as a person. It's about, as she says, what parts of your personality do you use to connect with what your audience needs? So knowing that we are complex people and that there are different parts of our personality that our audience may need from time to time. So it's not about changing who you are. It's about leveraging the parts of yourself that are most necessary for what it is that you're talking about. So if it is about, getting your team excited or getting them motivated for a big sale event or a holiday weekend or a project or whatever is going on, like using that part of your personality that is fun and outgoing and energetic to bring them along on that, versus, having a dialogue or conversation about maybe something that's very important, or maybe alignment on policy, or maybe, potentially a change to the business that's necessary and can impact everybody. You would want to leverage that part of yourself that is very specific, is very clear, is very much a serious kind of undertone, so that people understand, like, we're not playing around, we're not having fun right now, we're really having very serious dialogue. Like, it's not about changing who you are, but simply using the parts of your personality that best fit the environment and the mood that's necessary for the message.
Yeah, one of the things that this reminded me of, and there's a movie that came out in the 90s. I'm not sure if you've seen it or if our listeners have seen it. There's a movie with John Travolta called Get Shorty. Mm-hmm. And it's a movie from the 90s, and there's a conversation that he's having with Danny DeVito, another actor in the movie, and they're talking about people, relationships with other people, and John Travolta says to Danny DeVito something that has stuck with me for literally 20 years. He said, "When you're important, they'll wait for you." And he says it from a very egotistical standpoint of, people will wait for me. I'm going to do whatever I want to, and it doesn't matter if I make people wait because I'm the important one. They know I'm important, and they're going to wait for me. And so he says it from a different standpoint, but it really stuck with me because with the people that I see speak who are leaders, who convey, who you could tell they're leaders without knowing their title or their position. You can just tell by the way they talk that they are leaders. They have a rhythm and a cadence to their voice that implies that they're not in a hurry to have it be their turn. They understand that when it's their turn to speak, what they're going to say will be profound. It may not be the prevailing wisdom in the room, but it will be contributive. It will add something important to the conversation without a doubt. And this is something that I have to call back on all the time in my life, because my natural tendency when I'm talking is to be, when I'm excited about something, is I start talking a lot faster than I should. And I don't think that conveys the presence of a leader. I think to me, the presence of a leader is someone who doesn't take 100 words to say what could be said in 10, who's someone who speaks with intention. So you know what you want to say and you convey it, and then you shut up and you listen. And a person who is not a leader is the one who is constantly waiting for their turn to speak. And so, because they're worried about being pushed out, they're worried about not being part of the conversation. And so they're, instead of processing what other people are saying to them, they're just thinking about, where can I get my turn in here? And to me, that's one of the biggest differences between someone who I look at as not a leader and someone who I look at as a leader is, do they seem like they're trying to get to be their turn, or do they just know and have a confidence and have an understanding that when their turn comes, it'll come, and whatever they have to say will be profound enough to where people will take it seriously?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack.
The 1 minute hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, we're going to go over the Want to Sound Like a Leader video by Laura Sicola and talk about whether or not it's worth watching. And I'll tell you, for a video that's only 15 and a half minutes long, it's absolutely worth watching. I could spend a minute or two picking apart, like, the most important pieces, but this isn't an hour-long video like the Oprah Winfrey video from last week. And so I'm going to just go ahead and say it's worth all 15 and a half minutes of watching. I learned a lot from it. I'm a person who has taken 2.5 years of Toastmasters. I'm constantly trying to work on how I sound and to try to sound like a leader, and I learned a lot from this video. It's 5.5 years old, and I wish I saw it 5.5 years ago. She has a lot of fantastic points, and the things that she talks about are things that after you watch it, you can start being on purpose about doing in your life right away. These aren't things that you're going to watch and go, oh, this is amazing, and then forget all about it. They're real world things you can do, and they will help you sound like a leader almost immediately.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. I think that for me, even the great points and advice that she gives on how to sound like a leader, a lot of what I reflected on was how many people don't take that advice and how many people don't sound like leaders because they're not willing to adjust their voice and their overall demeanor and dialogue in regards to landing the message the way that it should be landed. So I thought same thing, a ton of great value, definitely worth the whole video. We'll probably watch this again, multiple times just to take more notes and really think about how I show up for my people.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's tough to watch and think, oh my gosh, I do some of these things. Because then I start to put myself back in the moments that I've had with other people and think, oh, is that how I sounded? Yeah, that's how I sounded. And, the best time to plant a tree is 100 years ago, but the second best time is right now. And so watch the video and start doing these things right away.
Yep. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.